Good day and welcome to the April 2023 edition of Robert Reads. Today we're going to be taking a look at T.S. Eliot, and we're going to do a recital, at least an excerpt of a recital from his work known as Ash Wednesday. Thomas Stearns Eliot, T.S. Eliot is his pen name, was born in St. Louis in 1988. His parents were originally from a rather prominent family in the Boston area, and it was his father's work as a manufacturer of advanced brick manufacturing that got them out to St. Louis. And more by chance or accident, he was born there. Otherwise, he would have been born in Boston. As I said, his father was a manufacturer and a very, no nonsense businessman. His mother was actually one of the pioneers in social work. She was one of the first social workers in a field that had just was somewhat nascent and beginning to take its place, especially in American cities. Uh, More importantly, she was also a poet, not quite famous. There are some examples of her work that are accessible, but great body of her work was not went unpublished. Anyway, we believe that certainly had a big influence on T.S. Eliot growing up. His most famous work is The Wasteland. That poem is a long form poem, much like Ash Wednesday, and it really explores the disillusionment and what he saw, had broken society, especially in the wake of World War One. It was published in 1922, and it's often seen as one of the primary examples of modernist literature in the 20th century. He was also a very successful playwright with with the plays, "The Murder in the Cathedral," which I've seen, and it's really pretty phenomenal, and "The Cocktail Party." Both of those received critical acclaim. He was also a very respected literary critic. His essays on literature and culture, such as the tradition and the individual talent, and as well as the metaphysical poets. And if you're into poetry, and I imagine if you're watching this, you're into poetry, I certainly recommend reading it. He does what I call yeoman's service in terms of describing the work of the metaphysical poets, of which he could include himself in that number. In 1927, he converted to Anglicanism, essentially the Church of England. He had, actually moved to England by this time. Some have questioned as to why he became a British citizen. Um, well, there are a couple of reasons. His family had a lot of relatives still in England, even though they were prominently in the New England area. Additionally, his wife was British, and by marrying her, this allowed him to also live in England. And with his dual citizenship, he freely moved from America to Britain, wherever his, publishing career took him, and allowed him a little bit more flexibility. He was originally, getting back to this issue about converting to Anglicanism, it certainly had a great influence, especially on his writing. He was raised a Unitarian Christian by his parents, who were, part of what we call the Protestant movement in, the late 19th and early 20th century. So you do see influences of both in his work. Um, Look, he wrote a tremendous amount, and it was quite popular and received a lot of critical acclaim. It's no surprise that in 1948 he won the Nobel Prize for Literature. In terms of literary, um, production and what he brought to our culture, he can be considered something of a polymath with his work in poetry and plays, as well as the literary criticism that he provided on, prior literature movements. It left a very, very big impact on both American and British literature culture. As mentioned, we're going to take a look and read the opening section of Ash Wednesday. It's one of his great works. Is often compared to his other great work, the Wasteland. They're of similar length. They're considered long form poems, not remarkably long. You can read them in probably the space of about 8 to 10 minutes, depending on how you read. Anyway, it was first published in 1930. It certainly shows a great deal of influence from his own spiritual beliefs and how he practiced them. Um, the poem itself has a very indirect style, and what I mean by that is that it's not what we'd find in prosaic literature, which states things plainly and directly. Um, he makes use of allusions to other things and very much uses symbolism throughout the entire piece. Um, it's a single cold reading of it, might make for challenging interpretation, but several readings will eventually kind of open up much of what he was trying to express. The key themes that you would find in reviewing this most likely would be um, the theme of spiritual renewal. Also, again, you'll come to this concept, and again, he has a poem entitled "The Wasteland." One thinks that both of these poems were inspired by the post-World War One environment and how it had impacted society. And when he looked down along that cultural landscape, he saw a barren landscape, and how it impacted him personally was that he was looking for ways to how he could become renewed in a society that he saw fractured. Again, the piece is full of Christian imagery. If you've been raised a Christian, much of it will be recognizable, if again, not indirectly, but certainly recognizable on the second or third reading. Yeah, and through this, and this is something that's very strong in all his work, and not just his poetry, but also his plays, and how he relates this to the metaphysical poetry movement. And it's that of time and memory and how they interplay with each other. Also, the strength of this just simply his use of the language of poetry. His command of the English language was unparalleled, and how he used that to express himself was nothing less than masterful. As noted earlier, Ash Wednesday, the poem itself is organized into 5 sections. We're going to read section 1 this morning. And a few notes before I launch into that recital. The poem itself, as much as it's considered part of the literary canon of the modernist literary movement, it it also exhibits characteristics of lyricality, which one would find in, say, the Romantic poetic literature of, say, the 19th century. And clearly, because of his timeline, he certainly saw lots of influences from both, and he incorporates them rather masterfully into a very, very great poem here. Again, the poem itself is deeply religious and very introspective. You can clear that it's clear to us that he was searching for some form of spiritual renewal and forgiveness and and also a way of transcendence, kind of rising above a lot of the negative feelings that he had picked up from seeing post World War One society. Um, in terms of the poem structure itself, each section of the poem builds on the previous one. It creates a sense of momentum towards what essentially is his final goal of some sense of spiritual union with the divine. Uh, Again, very full of Christian imagery and symbolism. If you pay close attention, you'll be able to appreciate the full density and complexity of this piece. Ash Wednesday, section 1. Because I do not hope to turn again, because I do not hope, because I do not hope to turn, desiring this man's gift and that man's scope. I no longer strive towards such things. Why should the aged eagle stretch its wings? Why should I mourn the vanished power of the usual rain? Because I do not hope to know the infirm glory of the positive hour. Because I do not think, because I know I shall not know, though unveritable transitory power. because I cannot drink there where trees flower and springs flow where there is nothing again. Because I know that time is always time, and place is always and only place, and what is actual only for one time and only for one place. I rejoice that things are as they are, and I renounce the blessed face and renounce the voice, because I cannot hope to turn again. Consequently, I rejoice, having to construct something upon which to rejoice, and pray to God to have mercy upon us, and pray that I may forget these matters that with myself I too much discuss, too much explain, because I do not hope to turn again. Let these words answer for what is done, not to be done again. May the judgment not be too heavy upon us. Because these wings are no longer wings to fly, but merely vans to beat the air which is now thoroughly small and dry, smaller and drier than the will. Teach us to care and not to care. Teach us to sit still. Pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Pray for us now and at the hour of our death. Ash Wednesday by T.S. Eliot. Again, I'd like to thank the Alberon Library for hosting Robert Reads and this month's edition, April 2023, reviewing the work of T.S. Eliot and his work Ash Wednesday. We'll see you in May. Take care.